My name is Serena Caldwell, and I am 30 years old. 4 days ago, I sat across from a stranger in a conference room in downtown Charleston, South Carolina, read a single document that had been sitting untouched in a cedar box for 7 years, and laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a nervous laugh, the kind of laugh that starts deep in your chest and comes out before you can stop it, the kind that makes a 60-year-old attorney in a three-piece suit slowly set down his fountain pen and ask if you'd like a moment to compose yourself. My parents hadn't spoken to me in 3 years. Not one call, not one text, not a birthday card, not a forwarded link, not even a generic holiday mass email. Nothing. 3 years of air where a family used to be. And then, out of nowhere, their lawyer's envelope showed up at my front door. One page, clean letterhead, professional font. They needed my signature to sell my grandmother's farmhouse, the only piece of land in this world that ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere. That document was supposed to take something away from me. Instead, it handed me everything. Before I tell you what was inside, take just 1 second to hit that subscribe button if you're new here, only if you genuinely want more stories like this one. And drop your city and your local time in the comments right now. I read every single one, and I love knowing where in the world you're listening from. Now let me take you all the way back to the beginning, to the dinner that ended everything. I grew up in a small town called Beaufort, South Carolina, the kind of town where the Spanish moss hangs so thick over the roads it feels like the trees are whispering secrets to each other, where everybody knows your last name, your grandmother's maiden name, and exactly which pew your family sits in on Sunday morning. My father, Warren Caldwell, owned a mid-sized landscaping company that had been in his family for 2 generations. He was a quiet man in public, disciplined, early to rise, never missed a Chamber of Commerce meeting. He coached my brother's Little League team for 5 years straight and showed up to every single game in a pressed polo shirt. My mother, Beverly Caldwell, was a real estate agent, the kind who put her face on bus stop benches and knew how to walk into a room and make everyone feel like she'd been waiting specifically for them. She volunteered at the school book fair, organized the neighborhood 4th of July cookout, and always brought a casserole when someone's relative passed away. From the outside, the Caldwells looked like a picture frame family. Then there was my older brother, Preston. Preston was 3 years older than me and had been the center of my parents' universe since the day he was born. Not in a dramatic, obvious way, more like the quiet kind of favoritism that you don't notice until you're 12 years old and realize you've been standing outside a spotlight your whole life, wondering why it never quite reaches you. Preston got a car for his 16th birthday. A secondhand Jeep, sure, but a car. When I turned 16, my mother handed me a bus pass and said, "It builds character, Serena." Preston's college application essays were proofread by my father at the kitchen table for 3 weekends running. When it came time for mine, my father said he trusted my judgment and patted me on the shoulder. Preston failed 2 semesters in his sophomore year of college, and my parents quietly paid the tuition anyway and never mentioned it to another soul. When I graduated from the College of Charleston with a degree in architectural design, debt I took on entirely by myself, working 22 hours a week at a coffee shop and another 10 hours doing freelance drafting, my mother posted about it on Facebook. One sentence, "So proud of our girl," and moved on. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm really not. I'm telling you because when you grow up in that kind of household, you start to confuse being capable with being unwanted. You start to believe that the reason nobody's helping you is because you don't need help. It takes years, sometimes decades, to understand the difference. My parents had a phrase they deployed like a Swiss Army knife whenever I brought up the imbalance. "Serena, you're the resilient one. That's your gift." And for years, I wore that like a medal. It wasn't until I was 25, sitting alone in my apartment eating birthday cake I'd bought for myself because nobody in my family had remembered, that I finally understood what resilient really meant in their vocabulary. It meant she'll figure it out. It meant she doesn't need us to show up. It meant she won't say anything. I said something. The one person in my family who never once made me feel like a footnote was my grandmother, Ruth Caldwell. Grandma Ruth lived on 40 acres outside Beaufort on a property that had been in the Caldwell family for 3 generations. A White House farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a barn that listed slightly to the left and still somehow stood, a pond that reflected the Georgia pines so perfectly it looked like the trees were growing in both directions. Every summer from the time I was 6 years old until I left for college, I spent 2 weeks at that farmhouse. Grandma Ruth taught me to read house blueprints on her kitchen table. She was an amateur architect by passion and had designed 2 additions to the property herself. She saw in me something the rest of my family had categorized as stubbornness and called it vision instead. She passed away when I was 23. Ovarian cancer, 8 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 71 years old, and she faced it the way she faced everything, directly, without performance, with more concern for the people around her than herself. At the funeral, my father gave a beautiful eulogy. My mother cried in the front pew. Preston was a pallbearer. I sat in the 3rd row in a black dress I'd driven 4 hours in and felt her absence like a door that had been removed from its frame. The whole structure of something just open, letting in cold air. After the service, at the reception at the house, my father pulled me aside near the barn. His eyes were red, but his voice was steady. "Your grandmother loved this property. We're going to take care of it. Keep it in the family." I nodded. I believed him. 6 months later, I found out my parents had moved Preston into the farmhouse, rent-free, while he got back on his feet after his second failed business venture, a food truck that lasted 11 months. I called my father. "It's temporary," he said. "Preston needs stability right now." "What about Grandma Ruth's things?" I asked. "Her drafting table, her blueprints, her—" "We'll sort through everything when the time is right, Serena." The time was never right. I drove out to the farmhouse that March. Preston had cleared out Grandma Ruth's studio, the room she'd used for her design work, and turned it into a home gym. Her drafting table was in the barn under a plastic sheet. Her hand-drawn blueprints, 50 years of them, were in a cardboard box on a shelf between a bag of fertilizer and a broken leaf blower. I didn't say anything that day. I carefully wrapped the blueprints in a garbage bag, loaded the drafting table into my car, and drove home. Preston watched me from the porch and didn't say a word. Neither did I. That was the beginning. I was 26 when I met Jonah Burke. He was a structural engineer working on a mixed-use development project in downtown Charleston, and I was the junior architectural designer attached to the same project. We argued over load-bearing wall placements for 6 weeks before we agreed to have dinner just to see if we could get through a meal without disagreeing about something. We could not. We got married anyway. 2 years later, small ceremony at a botanical garden in Charleston. Grandma Ruth would have loved it. My parents came. That's the most charitable thing I can say. My father spent most of the reception talking to Jonah's father about the landscaping business. My mother pulled me aside 40 minutes before the cake cutting to tell me that Jonah's family seemed lovely but modest. Jonah's father was a high school science teacher, his mother was a pediatric nurse, and that she hoped we had thought carefully about long-term financial compatibility. I smiled, excused myself, went into the bathroom, and took 3 deep breaths. A week after the wedding, at a family dinner my parents hosted, my father sat at the head of the table, looked at Jonah over a bowl of she-crab soup, and said with the pleasant casualness of someone who doesn't realize they're being cruel, "Serena always tested well. I thought she'd partner with someone in her professional field, a developer, maybe an architect at a bigger firm. No offense to what you do, Jonah. Structural work is important." The no offense was the offense. Jonah looked at him for a moment, then he said, "None taken, Warren. I think what I do is pretty important too." In the car on the way home, Jonah stared at the highway and said, "How long has he talked to you like that?" I looked out the window at the South Carolina darkness sliding past. "My whole life," I said. "Then why are we still having dinner with them?" I didn't have a good answer. The honest answer was that I kept showing up because Grandma Ruth had always encouraged me to, because she said, "Your father loves you, Serena. He just doesn't know how to show it to women. Give him time." So I kept giving him time. Right up until the night everything broke. Now, listen. If you've ever sat at a family table and felt completely invisible to the people who were supposed to see you clearest, I need you to hit that like button right now, because this next part, This is the part that changes everything. It was Thanksgiving, my parents' house. 23 people packed into a dining room designed for 14. My Aunt Patrice's green bean casserole, my cousin Deja's sweet potato pie, the NFL game muted in the living room. 3 conversations happening at once. Preston pulled me into the kitchen under the pretense of helping with dishes. He needed $40,000. Not borrowed, not a loan. A gift, he said. An investment in the family. He wanted to open a second business, some kind of outdoor adventure touring company. He already had a logo designed. He'd already been to a lender who'd said no. He'd already, I found out later, asked my parents who'd said they didn't have it liquid. He wanted me to pull from Jonah's and my savings, our down payment fund for the home we'd been saving for 3 years to buy. I said no, clearly, calmly. Preston nodded slowly the way someone nods when they've already decided that no isn't the final answer. He walked back into the dining room. 30 seconds later, I heard my father's voice rise above the noise. Serena. Not a question, a summons. I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked out. My father was standing at the head of the table, 22 people arranged around him like a jury. Your brother came to you for family support, he said, and you said no. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something real is happening and everyone is deciding whether to pretend they don't see it. I said no, I confirmed. That's $40,000 you're choosing to keep away from family. That's our down payment, Dad. Preston needs this more right now. I looked around the room. My cousin Deja was looking at her plate. My Aunt Patrice was refilling someone's water glass with enormous focus. Jonah, 3 seats down, had gone very still. Then my mother's voice came from the side of the room, low and aimed at my Aunt Patrice, but engineered to travel. She's been like this since she got married. Jonah's turned her against the family. I've actually been talking to their pastor about it. I had never spoken to my parents' pastor. I barely knew the man's name. But the room heard it, all 22 people, and not one of them spoke. I put down my fork. I looked at my mother, then at my father, then at Preston, who was studying the centerpiece like it held the meaning of life. I picked up my purse. I touched Jonah's shoulder. He stood immediately, no questions asked, the way a person stands when they've been ready for this moment longer than you realized. We walked out of that house. I didn't know, standing on my parents' front porch in the November cold, pulling on my coat, that I wouldn't walk back in for 3 years. Here is what nobody tells you about cutting contact with a parent. The silence is never actually silent. Within 2 weeks of that Thanksgiving, my parents had constructed a narrative and distributed it through Beaufort like circulars on a front porch. The story was efficient and devastating. Serena is struggling with her mental health. Jonah has isolated her from the family. They're worried about her. My cousin Deja called me in December, her voice careful and measured. Your mom told my mom you're seeing a therapist for some kind of breakdown. Are you okay? I had never told anyone I was in therapy because I wasn't. My mother had invented it, seasoned it with just enough clinical language to make it believable, and served it to people who trusted her completely. It got worse. My father called 2 former clients of mine, architects I'd built professional relationships with for 4 years, and checked in on me. In a professional network that size, that call isn't concern. It is sabotage wearing a concerned father's face. My mother stopped 3 people after church over 3 consecutive Sundays to explain that Jonah had become controlling and that she feared for her daughter's well-being. Jonah Burke, the man who drove 4 hours round trip in a rainstorm to pick me up when my car broke down on I-26, who learned to make my grandmother's biscuit recipe from a handwritten card I'd found in her things, who spent an entire Saturday helping my college roommate move apartments because I'd promised her I'd be there, was being described as a threat. One by one, the calls thinned out. The cousins who used to text, the aunt who sent birthday cards, the family friends who'd known me since I was in pigtails. By spring, only Deja was still calling, and even she chose her words carefully, the way you do when you're standing in the middle of 2 stories and you can't tell yet which one is true. Jonah and I moved 40 minutes north, far enough that I didn't have to worry about running into my mother at the grocery store, close enough that I still knew the way home by heart. I got promoted to lead designer at my firm. Jonah's engineering company took on 3 major contracts in a single year. We bought a house with our own down payment, every dollar of it, with a sunroom that faced east and a backyard big enough for a vegetable garden. It was a good life, a genuinely good life. But every November, when Thanksgiving came around, I'd sit in my own beautiful dining room at my own table I'd picked out myself and feel the outline of the seat that nobody from my family had ever sat in. 3 years went by like that. And then, one Tuesday morning in February, a cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. It sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it. If you've ever stared at a letter you were afraid to open because you knew it was going to change something, leave a comment below. Just say, "I've been there." You have no idea how much it helps to know you're not alone. And if this story is speaking to something you've been through, hit subscribe. These stories are made for people who've survived their own version of this. I opened it on a Friday morning. Jonah had already left for a site visit. The coffee was still hot, the sunroom was full of February light. The letter was from a Mr. Ellison, attorney at law, based in Beaufort. Crisp letterhead, 1 page. It stated that Warren Caldwell was initiating the sale of a residential property located at 7 Harrow Creek Road, Grandma Ruth's farmhouse, and that as a potential heir to the estate of Ruth May Caldwell, I was being asked to sign a quitclaim deed waiving any claim to the property. There was a signature line, a 30-day deadline, a phone number. I read it once, then again, then a third time. 3 years, not a phone call, not a text, not so much as a postcard. And the first time my family reaches out to me, it's through a law firm asking me to hand over the last place on earth that still smells like my grandmother. I set the letter down and looked across the kitchen at the shelf Jonah had built above the window. On it sat Grandma Ruth's small silver compass, the one she kept on her drafting table for 40 years. She gave it to me the last Christmas she was healthy enough to celebrate. "So you always know which direction is yours," she'd said. Next to the compass was a wooden box I hadn't opened in 7 years. Grandma Ruth's handwriting on the lid in black marker, "For Serena, when the time comes." I had always assumed it was a goodbye letter. I'd been afraid to read it and crumble. That night, for the first time in 7 years, I opened Grandma Ruth's box. Inside were 2 things. The first was a legal document, heavy paper, notarized seal, the heading in bold serif font, "Irrevocable Trust Deed, Ruth May Caldwell Living Trust." I read the first paragraph standing at my kitchen table, still in my coat. The farmhouse property at 7 Harrow Creek Road had been transferred into an irrevocable living trust 3 years before Grandma Ruth passed away. The trustee was a woman named Margaret Osei, Grandma Ruth's personal attorney in Beaufort. The sole named beneficiary was listed on page 2, Serena Ann Caldwell. The second item in the box was a piece of cream stationery folded 3 times, Grandma Ruth's handwriting, the careful architectural print she'd used her whole life, each letter deliberate as a blueprint line. "Serena, your father is a good man, but he has one blind spot. He protects what he can see and ignores what he assumes will take care of itself. He has assumed that about you your entire life. I want you to know that I never did. This house is yours. It has been yours since the day you sat at my kitchen table at 6 years old and asked me why the walls were where they were. You are the only one of us who has ever asked why. Don't let anyone take it from you. All my love, Grandma Ruth." I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, and I cried. Not the kind of crying that undoes you, the kind that settles something. The kind that feels like a conversation you've been waiting to finish. She knew. Before Thanksgiving, before the lawyer's letter, before 3 years of silence, she had already seen it coming, and she didn't just hope things would work out, she did something about it. Jonah came home and found me sitting on the floor, papers spread around me on the tile. He sat down next to me without asking why I was on the floor. He read the letter over my shoulder. When he finished, he didn't say a word. He just put his hand over mine. The next morning, I called Margaret Osei. She answered on the second ring, and her voice had the particular steadiness of someone who's been waiting for a call they always knew was coming. "The trust is valid and active," she said. "It was executed and filed with the county 7 years ago, during your grandmother's lifetime. The property never passed through probate. It was excluded from the estate entirely." I asked her the question I needed answered. Does my father have any legal claim to that property? A pause. None whatsoever. His name appears nowhere in the trust documentation. I called Ellison's office that same afternoon. The receptionist had the smooth, practiced voice of someone who fields uncomfortable calls for a living. "Are you calling to return the signed document, Miss Caldwell?" "I'd like to come in," I said. "I have some questions before I sign anything." A pause. Keyboard clicks. "Mr. Ellison has availability Thursday at 11. I'll be there." I hung up and called Margaret back. I asked her to prepare certified copies of everything: the trust deed, the original county filing, the beneficiary schedule, the notarized transfer documents. "All of it," I said. "I'll have everything ready by Wednesday," she said. And then, quietly, "Ms. Caldwell, would you like me to be present at the meeting?" "No," I said, "but I'd like you available by phone. I'll keep the morning clear." I spent the next 4 days preparing, not emotionally. I had made my peace with the emotional weight of this years ago. I prepared the way I prepare for a major design presentation. Every document in order, every fact verified against a second source, every possible objection anticipated and answered before it was raised. I pulled the county clerk's records online and confirmed the filing date. I cross-referenced it against the probate records from Grandma Ruth's estate and verified what Margaret had told me. The farmhouse had been transferred into the trust 3 years before Grandma Ruth died. It was never part of the estate. My father, Warren Caldwell, son of a contractor, practical man, person who had called Jonah financially unreliable at a dinner table in front of family, had staked his retirement and the roof over his head on Preston's outdoor adventure touring company. "There's a buyer for the farmhouse. Someone offered $280,000. Your dad told everyone the sale was basically done. He told people you'd already agreed to sign." I stared at the dark tree line beyond the garden. "Your dad told people I'd already agreed?" "He told people you'd already agreed." Those were his exact words. I thanked her. I sat on that porch for a long time after the call ended, listening to the Carolina night. Frogs, wind, the creak of the porch swing. Then I went inside, made tea, and finished organizing my folder. Thursday morning, I dressed carefully. Dark blazer, comfortable shoes, the kind of outfit that says, "I am here to work, not to perform." I put Margaret's certified copies in a leather portfolio Jonah had given me last Christmas. I set Grandma Ruth's silver compass on the passenger seat. Then I drove 40 minutes south on roads I knew so well my hands made the turns before my brain registered the signs. Past the Low Country Coffee, where Grandma Ruth took me every Saturday morning for a biscuit and a hot chocolate. Past the elementary school, where I won the 5th grade science fair with a model of a load-bearing bridge I'd designed myself, and where my parents didn't come because Preston had a travel baseball game that weekend. Past the long curve of Harrow Creek Road that leads out to the farmhouse, the water glittering silver through the trees. I didn't stop. I kept driving toward Main Street. Ellison's office was on the 3rd floor of a restored antebellum building on Bay Street. Dark wood floors, original plaster crown molding, a waiting area that smelled like furniture polish and expensive restraint. The receptionist looked up when I gave my name. Something in her expression was already calibrated toward managed sympathy. "Mr. Ellison will be with you shortly. Can I get you water?" "I'm fine, thank you." I sat down, opened my portfolio, checked the documents one final time, every page in order, Margaret's card clipped to the front with her direct number circled in ink. I closed it and rested my hands on top. A door opened down the hall. "Ms. Caldwell?" Ellison was tall, early 60s, silver-haired, the kind of attorney who'd built his career on being the most composed person in whatever room he entered. He gestured toward the conference room with the ease of a man who expected this meeting to take 20 minutes. I stood and walked through the door. And there, at the far end of the conference table, sat my father, Warren Caldwell. Same broad shoulders, same watchful stillness, same way of occupying a chair like he'd already decided the room was manageable. He looked up when I walked in. "Serena." His voice was even, warm even, in the controlled way of someone who has decided warmth is the correct strategy. I stopped 2 steps inside the doorway and looked at Allison. "I understood this meeting was between me and your office." Ellison straightened his cuffs. "Mr. Caldwell asked to be present. I felt it might help move things along." I sat down across from my father, set my portfolio on the table, didn't open it. Warren leaned forward slightly. "I'm glad you came. I know this has been a complicated time for everyone, but let's get through this cleanly, okay?" I looked at him. "You haven't asked how I am." He blinked. "In 3 years, this is the first contact we've had, and it came through a law firm. You haven't asked how I am." Warren's jaw shifted. "We've tried reaching out, Serena. Your number has not changed once in 3 years." Ellison cleared his throat and adjusted his pen. Warren pivoted, the way a salesman pivots when one angle isn't landing. "Look, this isn't about what's happened between us. This is about a piece of property. The house is sitting empty, nobody's using it. I have a buyer ready to close. This solves a real problem, and there's no reason to complicate it." He nodded at Ellison, who slid the quitclaim deed across the table. I picked it up, read every line, every clause. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the ceiling fan and my father's fingers doing a slow, unconscious rhythm against the mahogany. I set it down. "The last time we were in the same room, you told 20 people that my husband had isolated me from the family. I was worried about you. You told your pastor I was having a breakdown. Serena, you called 2 of my professional contacts, Dad." The word landed differently than I expected. Both of us felt it. Ellison was looking at his legal pad. I was a concerned parent, walking out of a family dinner and disappearing. I walked out of a dinner where Mom told a room full of people that my husband had turned me against the family. I walked out of the same place I've been walking out of my whole life, a room where the rules only apply to me. Warren's mouth pressed into a thin line. He turned to Ellison, the way a man turns when he needs a witness to confirm his version. "She's always done this, takes one moment and builds a whole grievance around it. Jonah's influence. She wasn't like this before." And there it was, the same script, word for word, the same performance with the same blocking in a different theater. My pulse was steady. I had expected this. I had prepared for exactly this. I opened my portfolio. I placed the first document on the table and slid it to the center. The bold header was unavoidable. Irrevocable Trust Deed, Ruth May Caldwell Living Trust. "This is an irrevocable trust deed," I said, "filed with the Beaufort County Clerk's Office 7 years ago by Ruth May Caldwell. The trustee is Margaret Osei. The sole named beneficiary," I turned to page 2 and placed it face up beside the first page, "is me." My father looked at the document the way a person looks at something that shouldn't exist but does. "What is this?" "Grandma Ruth's trust. The farmhouse was transferred into it 3 years before she passed. It never went through probate. It was never part of her estate." Ellison reached across the table before Warren could speak. He picked up the trust deed and began reading. Page 1, page 2. He turned to the county filing stamp, checked the date, turned back. He removed his reading glasses and set them on the table. And then he looked at my father with the expression of a man who has just understood why the math was never going to work. "What's he doing?" Warren said. His voice had gone thin. "Mr. Caldwell," Ellison said carefully, "were you aware that your mother established an irrevocable trust for the farm property? That's not possible. The house came to me through the estate. I handled the estate myself. According to this document, the property was transferred to the trust prior to your mother's death. If this is accurate and the county stamp indicates it was properly filed, the farmhouse would have been excluded from the probate estate entirely." Warren shook his head. "She wouldn't have done that. not without telling me. I held his gaze and said nothing. Ellison placed the document back on the table and folded his hands. Mr. Caldwell, I need to verify this with the county clerk before we proceed further, but if this trust is valid, I cannot in good conscience continue preparing documents for the sale of this property on your behalf. Warren's face had gone a color I had never seen on him before, the color of a man watching a calculation he was certain of come out completely wrong. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it. He picked it up and answered, "Not a good time, Preston." But the phone's speaker was old, the volume up too high, and in that silent conference room, Preston's voice came through clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Did she sign yet? Dad, the lenders called twice this morning. I need to know if we're getting the money." Warren cupped his hand over the phone. "I'm in a meeting. I'll call you back." "Just tell me if she signed." Preston's voice was tight, impatient. "Come on, she always does what you need when you just explain the situation. She's not going to let the whole family go under." Warren ended the call. The room held what Preston had just deposited into it. "She always does what you need." I let those words sit on the table between us for a full 5 seconds. Then, quietly, "She always does what you need." Warren set the phone face down. His neck was red from the collar up. "He's under pressure. He doesn't mean it like that." "How does he mean it?" No answer. Ellison was looking at the trust deed, not at either of us. I looked at my father. "I'm going to ask you something, and I'd like an honest answer." He looked at me. "Did you ever once check whether Grandma Ruth had a separate estate plan? Did you call her attorney? Did you search the county records? Did you consider, even for a moment, that she might have made her own decisions about her own property?" The silence was its own answer. "You assumed, the same way you've always assumed, that I would handle it, that I'd be fine, that I didn't need anything. You assumed the house was yours the same way you assumed I'd sign a piece of paper without asking questions, because I always did before." Warren pressed both hands flat on the table. His voice dropped into something I hadn't heard from him before. Not anger, something closer to desperation. "Serena, if this sale doesn't go through, I co-signed Preston's loans. I refinanced the house. If I don't clear this debt, we could lose our home. Your mother and I could lose everything." The room was very still. I had known this was coming. Deja told me. I had sat with it on my back porch in February dark, and I had let myself feel it fully before I walked into this building. "You refinanced your house for Preston's business," I said. "The same one he didn't research, the same one a lender already turned down. You put your retirement and your home on the line for him, and in all that time, you never once called to ask how I was doing?" Warren opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm not the reason your finances are in trouble, Dad. I'm not the solution either, and Grandma Ruth's farmhouse trust is not your safety net to sell. It never was." Ellison stood slowly. "I think we should adjourn. Mr. Caldwell, I'd strongly recommend consulting a trust litigation attorney regarding your options. Ms. Caldwell," he turned to me with something in his expression that was close to respect, "you're free to go." I gathered my documents, placed them back in my portfolio. The quitclaim deed sat in the center of the table, unsigned, like an unpaid bill that was never going to be collected. I stood. "Serena." My father's voice stripped down to one word. I stopped at the door. He was still sitting. His hands were flat on the mahogany, and they were shaking slightly. He looked like a man who had arrived at the end of a very long road and found it wasn't where he'd expected. "I know your number hasn't changed," he said. I held his gaze for a moment. "I know you know," I said, and I walked out. Through the lobby, past the receptionist, down the staircase that smelled of old wood and history, out into the February Charleston air. I sat in my car for 7 minutes, engine off, hands in my lap. I didn't feel victorious. I felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down with not triumph, but relief. Then I started the car and drove to Harrow Creek Road. But the story didn't end in that conference room. My father didn't go home. Deja called me that evening. "Your dad drove to the farmhouse. He and your mom and Preston are inside. Your dad told Preston it's his family's property, and no piece of paper changes that. I called Margaret Osei. They can't sell it, transfer it, or do anything to it, she confirmed. If they refuse to vacate, I'll send a formal demand letter. If that doesn't resolve it, we file for trespass. I don't want to have my father arrested at my grandmother's farmhouse. Then let's hope he makes a smarter decision. By Saturday, Preston had posted a photo on Instagram, the farmhouse porch, my mother in a rocking chair, Warren standing behind her with his arms crossed, looking out at the pond. Caption, "Family roots run deep. Some things are worth standing for." I stared at that photo for a long time. Preston was sitting in Grandma Ruth's porch swing, the one she built herself with reclaimed wood from the old barn, the one she and I used to sit in every August evening, watching the fireflies come up from the creek bank. The comments were sympathetic, people who only knew one version of the story. I didn't respond. I called Margaret. By Sunday evening, a certified letter was en route. Formal demand, 72 hours to vacate. My father wasn't dealing with a daughter anymore. He was dealing with a trustee, a county filing, and an attorney who had no interest in family politics. Preston deleted the Instagram post Sunday night. Monday morning, 51 hours left on the clock, my phone rang at 6:52 a.m. My mother. I answered. "Serena?" Beverly's voice was frayed. She'd been crying, or she was performing crying. With my mother, the line had always been hard to find. "This has gone far enough. My father can't sleep. Preston is falling apart. You're destroying this family over a house." "I'm not destroying anything, Mom. I'm honoring what Grandma Ruth wanted. Your grandmother would want us together. She left me a letter that says otherwise." A long silence, the kind where you can hear someone rearranging everything they thought they understood about a situation. "You've changed," my mother said finally. "I hope so." She hung up without a goodbye. She always exited conversations she couldn't control by making the other person feel like they were the one being difficult. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the morning light coming through the curtains. Jonah rolled over. "You okay?" She said, "I've changed." He was quiet for a moment. She's not wrong. They left the farmhouse Tuesday afternoon, 68 hours, just inside the window. Margaret confirmed it by text. "Property vacated. I've documented the condition." I waited a full week before I went. When I finally drove down Harrow Creek Road the following Thursday, the sky was the pale gold of a late February afternoon that has decided to be generous, the kind of light that makes even bare trees look intentional. I parked at the end of the gravel drive and sat for a moment. Then I got out and walked up to the front door. Inside, the farmhouse smelled like what it always had, cedar and old pine, and something faintly sweet like dried wildflowers. The kitchen was clean. My mother had wiped the counters before she left. The floors were swept. The furniture was straight. On the kitchen table, my father had left a single key and a folded piece of notebook paper. His handwriting was smaller than I remembered. "This wasn't about money. I hope you know that. Dad." I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket. I walked through every room slowly. The studio, where Grandma Ruth did her design work, cleared of the gym equipment Preston had installed, bare floors, afternoon light falling across the hardwood in long gold rectangles. Her drafting table, which I had rescued from the barn 3 years earlier, was back in my own sunroom at home, but I could still see the outline of it in the light. I walked out to the back porch and looked at the pond. The water was still. A great blue heron stood at the far bank in the particular way herons stand, like they're deciding whether the world is worth their full attention. I sat down on the porch steps. "Hey, Grandma, I found your box. I found the trust. I found the letter." The wind moved through the Georgia pines at the edge of the property. "You always said I was the one who asked why. You were right. I never stopped asking. Thank you for making sure the answer was already waiting for me." The numbers caught up with my father the way numbers always do, quietly, then all at once. Without the farmhouse sale, the $280,000 he'd been counting on was gone. The buyer walked. Preston's lender called in the personal guarantee. My father sold his work truck, liquidated part of his retirement account, and spent 3 months in quiet, painful reckoning. Preston closed the outdoor touring venture, the one that had technically never opened, and took a job managing inventory at a farm supply warehouse 2 counties over. Not a bad job, honest work, but a long fall from the adventure he'd sold everyone on. My mother stopped hosting the neighborhood cookout for the first time in 11 years, stopped showing up at the church women's auxiliary where she'd sat on the planning committee for a decade, stopped because people kept asking about me. How's Serena? Have you heard from Serena? The story my parents had built, devoted family, troubled daughter, concerned parents suffering in silence, had developed structural cracks the moment those trust documents became a matter of public record. In a town that size, when the facts start moving faster than the fiction, the storyteller loses the room. 3 weeks after the farmhouse situation resolved, I received a text from Preston. Serena, I know I don't have any right to ask anything from you, but I'm sorry. What I said on that phone call, what you heard, I was out of line. I'm sorry. I read it sitting on the porch at the farmhouse, my feet on the step where Grandma Ruth used to shell butter beans in the evenings. I didn't respond right away, but I didn't delete it. Here is the thing about healing that nobody puts on a motivational poster. It's not linear, it's not clean, it doesn't arrive like a package on your front porch one afternoon with a bow on it. It comes in pieces, a text you don't delete, a heron standing still at the edge of a pond, a letter in a cedar box that someone wrote for you years before you were ready to read it. If you've been waiting for permission to stop shrinking yourself for people who were never going to see you clearly anyway, this is it, right here. This is your permission. Jonah and I started renovating the farmhouse in March. Not a full renovation, more like a conversation with the building. What does it need? What wants to stay? What needs to go? We restained the porch floor, replaced the screens on the back windows, fixed the bathroom faucet that had dripped since I was in middle school. Jonah assessed the structural integrity of the barn. Sound bones, he said, just needs some attention, and we made a list. I found Grandma Ruth's design notebooks in a cabinet in the studio. 30 years of sketches, floor plans, hand-drawn elevations of additions she'd designed for neighbors and friends. A woman who never got a professional degree but understood spatial logic as intuitively as anyone I'd ever met in a formal firm. I sat on the studio floor for 2 hours reading through them. Then I got out my own notebook and started sketching. What if we opened this wall? What if the studio faced the pond? What if this place became something more? Jonah leaned in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee and looked over my shoulder at the sketch. Is that a guest suite? Maybe, I said, or a design studio. I haven't decided. He handed me the coffee. I'll start on the electrical Monday. The extended family came back in pieces. Deja was first, which surprised no one. She'd never fully left, she'd just been standing in the middle, waiting for the weather to change. 2 months after the conference room meeting, my Aunt Patrice called. Patrice, who had refilled someone's water glass rather than speak up, her voice had the particular weight of someone who'd been carrying a sentence for a long time. I should have said something at the table that night, she said. I saw what was happening and I said nothing. I'm sorry, Serena. I've been sorry since before you left the driveway. I know. I did. I also knew that saying nothing at a table when the room is watching is one of the oldest human instincts there is. I didn't excuse it, but I understood it. I'd like to come see the farmhouse, she said, if that's okay. Come in May, I said. The wisteria will be out. A few other cousins reached out, not all of them. The family didn't reunify in a clean, cinematic moment. It came back the way families actually do, unevenly, imperfectly, a few people at a time, some of them never. Uncle Dale, who'd been my father's strongest ally, never called. Neither did 2 cousins who'd apparently decided the version of the story they'd been given was the one they preferred. I didn't chase anyone. I didn't post a rebuttal. I didn't send a group text laying out the timeline. I didn't need the room to understand. I had the documents. I had Grandma Ruth's letter. I had the farmhouse.
And I had a husband who had never once, not for a single minute, stopped seeing me clearly. That was enough. My dad called the first time in April, not to negotiate, not to explain. He called on a Tuesday afternoon, and when I answered, there was a long pause before he spoke, like he was measuring the first word very carefully. "How are you?" 3 words, the ones he should have started with 7 months ago in that conference room, the ones he should have started with 3 years ago when I walked out of Thanksgiving. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm good, actually." Another pause. "I drove past the farmhouse last week. I could see from the road you've been working on it." "We have." "Your grandmother would have liked that." "I know." We talked for 11 minutes. Nothing heavy, nothing resolved, nothing promised. But 11 minutes, 2 voices, no lawyer's letterhead between us. When we hung up, Jonah looked up from his blueprints. "Who was that?" "My dad." He nodded and went back to his work. Some doors don't fly open. They open slowly, inch by inch, in the amount of time it takes 2 people to decide they'd both rather not stand in the hallway forever. I wasn't sure yet how far that door would open, or whether what was on the other side would be worth walking toward, but I left it cracked. That felt like enough.
It's a Saturday afternoon in late April when I finally understand what Grandma Ruth meant. I'm sitting on the farmhouse porch in the rocking chair she built herself, the one Preston posed in for a photo he later deleted. The wisteria along the fence is just starting to open, purple and heavy and sweet in a way that makes you stop whatever you were doing and just look at it. Jonah is inside. I can hear him singing off key to something on the radio while he works on the kitchen wiring. Through the open window, the smell of sawdust and coffee. The pond is still. A great blue heron, maybe the same one as before, stands at the edge of the water in that unhurried way, like it has made its peace with time. I've got one of Grandma Ruth's old design notebooks open in my lap. I'm sketching the studio expansion, the one I've been turning over in my head since March. A wall of south-facing windows, a workspace that looks out at the water, a place for someone to sit and ask why. I talk to her sometimes, not out loud, just in the way you carry on a conversation with someone who left the room but never really left. "Hey, Grandma, I found your box." The wisteria moves in a light wind. "I know what you meant now. You didn't just leave me a house. You left me proof that someone saw me. Not the strong one, not the one who doesn't need anything, not the one who'll figure it out. Just me. That was enough. That was everything." I look down at my hands, rough from sanding, from painting, from the ordinary work of making something yours. Not the hands of someone who was handled gently, the hands of someone who built what she has, one decision at a time, starting with the decision to stop pretending that being overlooked was the same as being independent. My name is Serena Caldwell. I am 30 years old. 7 years ago, my grandmother left me a cedar box I was too afraid to open. 3 years ago, my parents stopped talking to me. 4 days ago, their lawyer sent me one document that was supposed to take my grandmother's farmhouse away from me. Instead, it sent me to a cedar box, and in that cedar box was the one thing my family spent 30 years failing to give me: evidence that I was worth protecting. Not because I was useful, not because I was resilient, not because I was low maintenance, because I was worth it. Because someone who loved me decided that long before I believed it myself and made sure I would know it when I needed it most. Before I go, I want to leave you with something. Grandma Ruth didn't have a law degree. She wasn't a wealthy woman. She couldn't change my father or undo 30 years of the way my family was wired. She couldn't force anyone to see me. But she could do one thing. She could make sure that when the moment came, and she knew the moment would come, I would have something solid to hold on to, something true, something that couldn't be rewritten by anyone's version of events. That's what she gave me. And here's what I want you to carry out of this story today. You don't have to wait for the people who overlooked you to finally see you before you start building the life you deserve. You don't have to wait for an apology before you heal. You don't have to keep the door bolted shut, but you also don't have to stand there holding it open for people who haven't earned the right to walk through. You get to decide. That's not cruelty, that's dignity. And if there's a grandma roof in your life, someone who sees you, who shows up, who does the quiet, unglamorous work of protecting you even when you don't know you need protecting, go tell them. Today, don't wait for a cedar box. If this story reached something real in you today, I'd love to know. Drop a comment and tell me, what's one thing someone did for you that you didn't understand until years later? Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this. Every single one is made for the people who needed to hear it. And to everyone who has ever been called the strong one when what they actually needed was to be seen, I see you. I'll see you in the next one.